you could
I'll call her when this is over.
tell her I need a doctor's note. Otherwise,
No,
it's not an excused absence.
I will definitely tell her.
It's very different without Estelle. And I see Robert's on, my dear, dear Robert. So good to see you. So we're going to, God willing, on a weekly basis, be studying this thematic commentary on the Torah that I've been working on for the last over 3 years now. And it's not really a Parsha book. It's arranged by the Parshiot. That's the way it is, but it's a thematic commentary on virtually every chapter in the Torah. And perhaps Shuli, who is so important to everything that I do, and Shuli made a great contribution to the book. If Shuli can put up the cover, one of the covers, I'd like to show you what the cover is and what.
I don't know if I have that ready to share, but I'm going to try to get it up in time.
Okay, if you don't, it's fine. The uniqueness of the book is, I hope it has some uniqueness, you never know, is that it's a book that presents Torah as a love story, a real love story. When I grew up, and to this day in the rabbinate, I see that many people identify their Judaism and certainly their orthodoxy by the rabbis they don't care for. There you got it. By the rabbis they don't care for, by the synagogue they don't go to. And we need today more than ever a different kind of Judaism, a different kind of orthodoxy, to present the Torah from a perspective of love. And so it's 5 volumes. This is the Breshit volume on Genesis. So let's make that as large as we can, even though this says Exodus. So we'll take it. There it is. Now I see it. And as you can see about the title on the top left-hand side, this is on the back, the title of this thematic commentary on the Torah, Torat Ahavah, Loving Torah, has a twofold message. First, loving can be read as a verb, reflecting my passion for Torah. It's called in English, loving Torah. In the words of the psalmist, how I love your Torah, I meditate on it all day long, from the book of Psalms. Second, loving can be seen as an adjective reflecting what for me is the foundation of Torah. At its core, Torah is a book of love. Each letter expresses God's infinite love for his people and for humankind. So if you look on the right-hand side, loving Torah moves in 2 directions. It moves loving to Torah, and in that way, loving is a verb, loving Torah. It's our love of Torah, and it moves in the opposite direction so that loving is an adjective. It's descriptive of the Torah. I'm not aware of another book on Torah that has in its title just these 2 words. There are synagogues that are called Avat Torah. In Englewood, I believe, a wonderful synagogue is called Avat Torah. But in book, that really is not the way it is. And at this point in my life, it started as a project of just putting together the Vorspeises that I used to do, but it's something very, very different now, and it's evolved to express almost a counterthought to the Torah that I was taught over my younger years, certainly a very rigid Torah, a God to be feared. And while there must be rules and regulations, Judaism is not all kumbaya, but in the same breath, it should be expressed as being a loving document. I'll say one more word. If you look at the top, the cover was done by our daughter, Dina Levy. I wanted our children to participate in all of this. And Dina did the paper cut, and Rabbi Ezra Zelikson, who is so gifted, my goodness. Ezra is not only a Talmid Chacham, but he has such a depth of soul, his sensitivities. He's an artist in everything that he does. He's an absolute gift. So Ezra played a very major role once the raw paper cut was put out there to align it properly, and he's particularly gifted in that area. But as you could see at the top of Torat Ahavah, that is the artist's imagery of the Kruvim, the cherubim on top of the ark, from where God speaks. And you could see the wings, and the wings are reflective of an embrace. And here it's symbolic of God's intimate love of his people, not only of the Jewish people, but of Kol Yoshvei Tevel, of all human beings, and the larger world, the earth and the heavens and the constellations and what have you. It's an embrace. That's why God is often spoken of as Ani lidodi vidodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to God. In fact, I would argue that one could say, and the mystics talk about it, that love, euphoric love, really experiencing love, is a gateway to gaining a greater glimpse of the divine himself. I use the male gender, not that God is male, it's not, it's neuter, whatever, but because in love, one comes very close, if the love is working, while remaining an individual, to feeling a oneness, a sense of unity with the other. And in the same breath, love could be euphoric, it's overflowing. And those elements reflect God. One gets a sense of the oneness of God, of the glory of God, of the infiniteness of God, because there are moments of love when one feels that one is absolutely flying. Those are the wings of the Kruvim, the intimacy. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And while that could be understood as being very earthly, very earthly. I'm sorry, I'm trying to start this. Here we go. As being very, I'm not sure what you want from me, Shuli.
I just wanted to be able to see you.
How do I do that?
No, you did.
Okay.
You did.
As being, I don't see the covers down here. As being very earthly, the reality is earthly, but the love could also be our love with God. Now the transition. But the prophets, Jeremiah, they say things like this. But wait a minute. If our relationship to God is the relationship of husband and wife, well, Jewish law has it that if there's been a divorce between husband and wife, and let us say wife marries someone else, she's forbidden to go back to her original husband. And the prophet actually says, one moment, given that the Jewish people left God and wandered away, and in fact embraced other gods, however we understand other gods, but rejected God, what happens then? The love has been broken. The the Jewish people cannot return to God? The prophet actually asked this question. And I think the response is that there's another kind of love. And that's the child's face of the Kruvim. The wings is the embrace. The face is the face of the child. And we're all children, no matter how old we are. And that represents not the intimacy of spousal love. It's a very warm, close love, but there is no more intimate love than the love of that is spousal or partner's love. There's nothing more intimate than that. But there's another kind of love, and that's a parental love. It is not as intimate as the spousal, if you will, horizontal love. It's a kind of vertical love because it's from one generation to the next generation. A child's love of a parent and a parent's love for a child is something that can never be broken. Now, I'm not arguing that there are not families where there have been breaks in the relationship between a child and a parent, but the reality is a child is a child is a child, and a parent is a parent and is a parent. That never, ever will be broken. So let's take a look at it on the Hebrew side. The cover of Torat Ahavah, Loving Torah, is a magnificent paper cut created by my daughter, Dina Levy. In the center rests the Kruvim atop the Ark in the Holy of Holies, representing the dual way God loves Am Yisrael and Kol Yoshvei Tevel, the larger world. The wings reach up and out to embrace, representing the intimate spousal love encounter. But no matter how intense the love, separation is possible. What occurs, the prophet asks, when God is abandoned by his people? It is here that the figure of a child's face, as found in the Kruvim, comes into play. No matter our age, we are all children. And so this aspect of the Kruvim represents God's love as a father or mother. Av harachaman, Av means father. Rachaman, from the word rechem, womb. Parental love that can never be broken. And if you look at the cover, by the way, you can see perhaps on the bottom left-hand side, if you could point this out, there is a bird hovering over a nest. That is an image from the Bible where God says that his love is Kenesha Yair Kino Al Gozalav Yirachef. God's love is like the love of the bird hovering over its young. Notice the bird hovers, doesn't press down on the eggs because the eggs will crack. The love of a parent is a love of being there for our children, but always making space for our children to be who they are. We may give wings to our children, but where they fly, we have to give them the space to fly where they wish to fly. And whatever they choose, I believe our role is to be there and to encourage them to be the best that they can be. As I said this past Shabbat, parental love, it is much easier to hold on than to let go. So that bird over the nest, that represents God's parental love, hovering over his people, but not choking his people, not squeezing his people, not being there. God is there, but we've matured and God gives us distance, even as from God emanates the Torah and all of that, the teachings, but we're given the distance with our freedom of choice to be who we are. And so that is the love of a parental child love. On the right side, you could see a well. And that well represents, at least in this artistry, that moment when Jacob sees Rachel at the well. and their love was so intense. And ultimately they marry, of course. That's the intimacy. That's the love of God as spouse. And at the top, you could see that there is on the top right-hand side, the angle, you could see this rose. That too is the intimate love, as it says in Song of Songs, Kashoshana ben achochim, like a rose amongst the thorns, such is my love for the other. That's more an expression of the intimacy of love. And you'll also notice that the books are, God willing, will be 5 distinct books. They're not very large books. Breshit has about 200 pages, Shmot 170, and then it goes on. But if you look at them, if we can just go through them, you'll see that it's blue and white, but in gradations, they come and become a stronger blue and white. If I could face everyone, the idea is that blue in the Midrash is understood to represent the heaven.
Rabbi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we're not seeing your face. I wonder if we're seeing the table.
Maybe.
Are you able to flip your?
Here we go.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Not much to see here anyway, but so, yeah. So blue, it represents the heavens. The Midrash says, the rabbis say, the place of God. And as a matter of fact, blue and white is the color of the land of Israel, the color of the Israeli flag. As a matter of fact, my daughter Ilana, our daughter Ilana, and Michael, our husband, who made Aliyah with 9 children, and now they have grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So Ilana wrote the epilogue to the book, which appears in Devarim. And the epilogue talks about how part of the loving Torah is to recognize that Israel, the land of Israel, the state of Israel, is an integral part of this love story. And bearing in mind that the flag is blue and white, as I've said, the color gets more and more blue and white because the story of the 5 books is our movement from Breshit, from family to Egypt, the Exodus, and we're moving closer and closer, traveling to the desert, finally entering into the land of Israel. And then the blue and white is starkly a blue and white. By the way, my son Dove, the scholar, wrote the foreword. I just wanted all the children to be part of this. And right in front of the book, there's going to be something that my scholar son said to me. We try to study every week, and we try to study the book of Psalms, which I love. I love very, very much. He writes on all kinds of esoteric matters. Like now he's writing a book on Gehenna, which means hell. His first book was on the theology of protest, pious irreverence. And he was looking for a title, a fancy title. So Toby suggested, you're writing on hell, why don't you, call it Go to Hell or To Hell With You if you don't buy my book. You have to joke a little bit to keep all these scholars, to make sure that they stay humble, although Dove is so humble, he drives me nuts. And in scholarship, very often there's not much humility. There's too much cutthroat competition, but he's a rare, humble boy. So he's not a boy, man. And he wrote the preface, and he recently said to me, and we're putting this in front of the book, he said the following to me, and with this I'll end, and I want to get your observations, and then we'll begin our study of a piece on the Akedah that Daniela so influenced. He said to me, Abba, Father, we study the same text together. But when I study the text, I'm trying to find out what the text means. But you, Abba, when you study the text, you're trying to find meaning in the text. I want to repeat that. The scholar said, I try to find out what the words mean, what the text means. You, Abba, you're trying to find meaning in the text. I said to him, that's why you're a scholar and I'm a rabbi, which is correct. And I'd like to argue that both have elements of being correct, of understanding the text, and yet if I could see it in the text, how it relates to the human condition, for me, that's ultimately what Torah is about. Torah is not written in a vacuum. It's not a book like all books. It's meant to impact our lives. So every sentence I try to ask, what does it mean? How does it influence what we do in life? And so the book has 5 themes on each portion, with some portions having 6. So altogether, there are close to 280 essays, themes of the 5 books. And as I mentioned to you, please don't buy it, because it's a gift to my Tuesday morning class, because this class so influenced, so very, very much influenced the writing. As a matter of fact, you know that in the front of a book, the publisher always writes, please, it's against the law to Xerox any page of this book. You can only do so if you get permission from the publisher. And I wrote to him and I said, dear Elon, I'd like it to be a little different. I'd like it to say, please, please Xerox any part of this book and spread it far and wide. And please, duplicate it. Bevakasha. And he said there are legal issues, so we'll see where that's going to end. But that's what I really feel within myself. It goes without saying, none of the books that I've written have it goes without saying, I don't take any money for writing the books. It's right is right, not, you hope people will read your books. My books are not great sellers at all, but you write because you have a need to write. And I want to encourage all of you, don't be afraid to write. Everyone can write. Everyone can express themselves. So I'll just stop here now just to get a few of your comments just on that introduction. What we'll be doing this year is every week we'll be studying a different piece from Torat Ahavah.
I see Tova's hand. And Tova, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment on what you said about meaning, that you look for meaning. And that's because you're the philosopher and we are the beneficiaries of all your wisdom as a result.
Thank you. But I do want to say that it's very reciprocal. This book, as I write in the beginning, is so much a product not only of my thinking, but of your thinking. Your thinking, Tova, Arnie, of your thinking. I see Arnie's on. That's what it is. I'm not a big believer in hierarchical rabbinics, hierarchical Judaism, hierarchical scholarship. I really believe that we are all in a conversation. And if I'm looking for meaning in life, my life has been so touched by the ideas, by the actions of so many people with whom I've been blessed to have interaction with. With that, I want to just start us off on the study, which we may have to finish next week. I want to take a look at the Akedah and yes, Arnie, please.
Oh, you're also muted, Arnie.
I just wanted to ask a question that's puzzling me. With all these different descriptions in Torah about or in prayer about our relationship with God. It seems like in the Torah, there's an encouragement from God to view one another as brothers and sisters, which would then make it seem important to God to have that relationship among people. I'm just wondering if God, and also we're supposed to partner with God to build a better world. So I'm wondering if in all the theology, if there's any mention or thought about God being a brother or a sister to all of us.
Very much so. And a brother and a sister is also a relationship that can't be terminated. It's a blood relationship. Nahum Sana argues that when Sarah said that she is Abraham's sister, he argues, quoting ancient literature, that it's not that Sarah was saying, I'm not Abraham's wife. But what she was saying is that my spousal relationship with Abraham is so strong, it's as if I'm his sister. It's a wife-sister relationship, which can never be severed. And he found documents, ancient documents, that describe a relationship of husband and wife. And there's another relationship called wife, sister, husband, where the wife is a sister as well. And I absolutely, the way we love in life is very much an imitation. It's a small glimpse, what's called in the Latin, the imitatio Dei, of the way God loves. But with that, let me just get some water. I'm supposed to drink all day. So when we begin the chapter in Breshit, what stands out is the togetherness of Abraham and Isaac. I'll start it off with you. I could face everyone still yet, Shuli. It begins with the text that God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham rises, we all know the narrative. He saddles his donkey. He takes a couple of lads, maybe they were Yishmael and Eliezer. Yishmael was Isaac's half-brother and Eliezer was the steward of the house, saddles his donkey, and then the text says, Ve'et Yitzchak bino. So they're traveling together. Abraham, Isaac on the donkey, and there are two assistants, two helpers. And then in sentence 5, as they get close to Moriah, Abraham says to his assistants, you remain behind, and I and Isaac, we will go up to Moriah. And we will do what we have to do. This is something between me and Isaac and God. And so the Torah describes in sentence 6 how Abraham takes the wood and he takes Isaac and they walk together, and the language in the Bible is Vayilchu Shnehem Yachdav. And the both of them walked together. My opening point here is, when I look at this text, is the recognition that there was something close. It was a close relationship, even as they walked to Moriah, between Abraham and Isaac. And in sentence 7, Isaac, who some say was in his teen years, others claim he was in his 30s, Isaac turns to his father and says, Dad. This is the first time Isaac ever speaks to his father. Dad. And you can interpret that to mean he says, Dad, what are you doing? I see he goes on to say, you've got a knife? You don't have an animal to slaughter. Am I that animal? So Isaac is wondering about this. He has a sense, children, we think children don't know. What I have found in raising children is children know everything. They just don't tell us everything, but they see everything, they take in everything. And Isaac is struggling with what's happening. And Abraham responds, don't worry, everything will be okay. And despite Isaac's concerns, Vayehu shnehem yachdav, very unusual for the text to repeat the same phrase, and both of them walked together. Bottom line is they're moving out, Abraham and Isaac, and they are really a pair. It's wonderful when a parent and a child can spend quiet time together. Our son-in-law, who's like our son, I always say we don't have 3 children, we have 6 children because we consider the children, the spouses, our biological children to have married to be like our children. They are our children. So Michael, our son-in-law, who's like our son, every time one of his children in Israel finished the army or finished service, so he takes them to wherever they want to go. So Ayala, he had to go to these rock concerts in Europe and this and that, but Noam is a big sports fan. So they came in this week, and I think their schedule was Saturday night, they went to the Islander game, and Sunday they went to the Giant game, and Sunday night they went to the Ranger game, and last night they were in Philadelphia, and they were happy to see the Philadelphia, whatever they're called, the Philadelphia football team lose, because that meant that the Giants were going to gain space. So that's the way they did things together. Abraham and Isaac, they were together, even though Isaac is sensing something's about ready to happen. Then, moving into a second phase, we all know the story. Abraham binds Isaac, lifts the knife. The knife is on the neck of Isaac. I think I've told you this, that when we were kids in camp, we once won bunk night. Bunk night was you had to put on a play. So I was 7, 8, 9 years old. We put on the play of the binding of Isaac. And my line was that when whoever was acting out Abraham with his knife on the neck of Isaac, I screamed out from the side, Nicht mit der milchigen Messer, not with a dairy knife. That was the punchline. But God intervenes, and God says, hey, Al tishlach yadcha lanar. Don't touch the child. And Isaac is not sacrificed. He's not sacrificed. And in the end, a ram is sacrificed in its stead. And God says to Abraham, you have shown such a commitment to me. Vitbarchu b'zaracha kol goyei haaretz. In your seed will be blessed all the nations of the world. That's chapter 22, sentence 18. And that is a lift right out of chapter 12, sentence 3, when God first appears to Abraham and he says, you're the one, the nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. The idea of being Jewish is not to keep this mission to ourselves, but to spread it to the world. And there in chapter 12, when God first meets Abraham, he's given that mandate. Here it seems that he's finally fulfilled that mandate. V'barchu b'zaracha kol goyei haaretz. That's my second point. Now we come to the third point, and I want to present it to you. Next sentence. So let's go over this again, summarize. Abraham and Isaac are walking together. Second point, Isaac is almost killed. At the last moment, there's an intervention. God says to Abraham, now I see how committed you are. You have been true to your mission, and you've succeeded. Number 3, the text says as follows. Sentence 19, if we can put that on the board, because this is a very important sentence. Shuli will put it up. Thank you, Shuli. It says, Vayashav Avraham el Ne'arav, which means that Abraham returned to his lads, Vayakumu, and they rose. First of all, just in those 4 words, Vayashav Abraham el Ne'arav, there is a basic question in sentence 19. Let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at sentence 19 a little further down. And in sentence 19, here it is. It's right before this paragraph. Vayashav Avraham el Narav. Abraham then returned to his servants. Question, what do you mean Abraham returned to his servants? Where was Isaac? Where was Isaac? They had been together. And Isaac's not here. All it says is Vayashav Avraham el Narav. And then the text says, he returned to his Narav. Who are his Narav? The Narav are his helpers, his attendants, whom he had left behind when he went to Moriah. Then it says Vayakumu, and they rose. Who's the they? It's referring to Abraham and his attendants, not Isaac. Isaac's not here. Vayelchu yachdav. And they walked together el Be'er Shava, to Be'er Shava. Now, if you, Vayelchu yachdav, that language, that's the 3rd time we find this phrase, Vayelchu yachdav. Here it's Abraham and the lads. But there were 2 other times that Vayelchu yachdav is mentioned. Once in sentence 6 and once in sentence 8. Let's go back up to sentence 6 and 8. We've discussed this. In sentence 6, they're on their way to Moriah. And what does it say there in sentence 6? Abraham took the wood, we can point, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together. Referring to Abraham and Isaac. And in sentence 8, after Isaac had questioned Abraham, wondering whether he's the sacrifice, Abraham said in sentence 8, it is God who will see to the sheep for this burnt offering, my son. And again it says, and the 2 of them walked on together. But so the phrase Vayelchu shneim yachdav is associated with Abraham and Isaac. But if we go down to sentence 19, let's go down, we have that same phrase that they walked together, but it's not Abraham and Isaac. Let's look at the English. Abraham then returned to his servants. Isaac's nowhere to be found. And they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. But if you look at the sentence reads, Vayashav Abraham el Narav, Vayakumu vayelchu yachdav. There's the phrase, and they departed together. If I can face everything. It's striking that Abraham and Isaac were together when they went to Moriah, and even at Moriah, and that's the description of the Bible. But by the end, Isaac is not there. And when it says that they went together, it's not Abraham and Isaac, it's Abraham and the attendants. If I could face everyone for a moment, Shuli, if that's possible. Now, the normative response to this, the normative response to the question after the Akedah, where was Isaac? That is the following, that the experience of the Akedah was so powerful that Isaac becomes completely and wholly under Abraham's care. And so when the text says that Abraham returned, it doesn't have to say that Isaac was with him. He was completely under Abraham's care. So when Abraham returned, clearly Isaac returned with him. So says the 11th century Ibn Ezra. And he's a literalist. For him to say something like that when Isaac's name is not mentioned is quite something. He was really very, very concerned about it. And there are others, later medieval interpreters, who say, where was Isaac? He was so enthralled, so taken by the spiritual experience of Moriah that he went off to a yeshiva. And in this yeshiva, he studied for 13 or 14 years. This really is the Midrashic tradition that Isaac was a willing participant. And he said to Abraham when he was bound, "Oh, Father, bound me properly." The expression in the Medrash, in the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, is "Koshreni yafeh," bind me properly. I am a willing participant. Whatever God wishes, I will do. And this same Midrash says that's why the binding is not called the binding of Abraham, because the key character is Isaac. After all, it was his life who was on the line. And it was not so much the readiness of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, which was central, but Isaac, who could have been in his 30s, his preparedness to be sacrificed to God, that was the key. That has been the traditional way of looking at this text. They were together when they went to Moriah. And although the text says that when they returned, Abraham returned, and Isaac is not mentioned, Isaac was the clone of Abraham. He was one with Abraham. So it's built in and understood. If Abraham returned, then Isaac must have been right with him. As Abraham was a yeshiva boy, Isaac was so inspired, he went off. He went off to the yeshiva. He was part and parcel of the binding of Isaac. Now, here we're going to take a 180-degree turn, and I'd like to share with you a beautiful, beautiful piece from a poem that my dear, dear Daniela wrote. I believe it's entitled Burns, but this I want to read, and this is what inspired what I'm about ready to share with you. This is what our dear Daniela wrote. Let's take a look at it. It's a little further down. Here it is. We're getting right up to it. Daniela Grunfeld, a dear friend and poet, describes Isaac's emotional state in her poem Burnt. The boy and the man went down the hill. The man elated that he had obeyed his Lord. The boy struck dumb, numbed forever after by the terror of what had been done to him. Let's read that again. It's just written so beautifully. Let's go to the top again. Going back to our sentence, when it says that Abraham returned, what Daniela is suggesting is maybe Isaac did not return with him. He did not return because it was really PTSD. He just was suffering from what had occurred. By the way, in the Akedah story, Abraham and Isaac talked to each other. From that point on, Abraham and Isaac never talk. They never speak again. So Daniela writes, the boy and the man went down the hill. The man, referring to Abraham, elated that he had obeyed his Lord. The boy struck dumb, numbed forever after by the terror of what had been done to him. Now, I'd like to face everyone for a moment. I want to say one more word about this. I'll speak another 2 or 3 minutes, but you have to listen now very closely. When we look in the text, when is the next time after the binding of Isaac that Isaac appears. The binding of Isaac is chapter 22. Isaac doesn't appear again until chapter 24. And in chapter 24, you remember that chapter. It's actually in this portion of the week where Rebecca is brought to marry Isaac. And the text goes out of its way to say the following. It says, here's the text, sentence 61, that Rebecca was riding on the camels, and Rebecca came towards Isaac. And then it says in sentence 62, very long chapter, V'yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai roi. This is the next time Yitzchak's name is mentioned. Isaac came from a place called Be'er Lachai Roi. Anybody know with what is Be'er the
It's associated with Hagar. She's the one who says it and names the place in a sense. And
wonderful. Who's saying that? Who is that?
that's Miriam.
Miriam, please. Again, what is it?
The last time we heard of the place name, I think it only occurs twice before then, is when Hagar is rescued, as it were, and she names the place where that happened, Be'er Lachai Roi, place
Right.
where God saw me or recognized me or witnessed me,
Right.
and so on. So he seems, Isaac seems to have come from Be'er Lachai Roi.
Right. And Be'er Lachai Roi, Miriam is saying so correctly. You know, there were two expulsions of Hagar in chapter 16 and 21. In chapter 16, when Sarah had afflicted Hagar, so Abraham throws her out. She insists, Sarah does, that she be thrown out, and she's wandering in the desert. And God says to her, you will have a child, and his name will be Be'er Lachai Roi. It's not so simple to try to find out where Be'er Lachai Roi was, but if we look at the first time Be'er Lachai Roi is mentioned is in chapter 16, if we can put that up, sentence, let's take a look at it. Be'er Lachai Roi is chapter 16, sentence 14. It says that God intervenes and says to Hagar, you're going to have a child, and the child's name will be Yishmael. And then it says, therefore the well where God made this promise to Hagar was called Be'er Lachai Roi. Hine ben Kodesh uvein Bored. Let me face everyone. That basically is understood to be, it was sort of in the Sinai towards the Gaza area. That's where it was. But Be'er Lachai Roi is the place of Yishmael. It's the place of Hagar. Now follow me for a second. I get the chills when I think about this. If Daniela is right, and I believe there's every reason that Daniela has tapped into something very powerful. Something happened. Isaac was struggling after this event. I realize this is not the traditional way of looking at it, but I'm just reading the text, and the way we study is we look at the text. Of course, we love Rashi and so on, but we're our own commentators. Stay humble, we have to stay, but he's returning alone, Abraham. Where was Isaac? Isaac was spiritually and emotionally and psychologically a mess. He was wounded. I know, I become the rabbi of Garin Sabar. We try to inspire young men and women to join the Israeli army, Americans. It's not so simple to join the Israeli army. We have grandchildren who've been in the army. When they leave the army, they're different people. Our grandson who was in Gaza, Gaza is already 7-8 years ago, the war in 2014. You feel the effects of it. And Isaac Isaac feels the effects of it. You know, Elie Wiesel in his book, when he discusses the Shoah, the imagery of the Shoah for him was the first survivor, he says, was Isaac. That's his language. He says this he wrote a beautiful book on biblical characters. Messengers is in the title. I forget the whole title name, but of course, everything he writes is beautiful, a blessed memory. So Daniela has a point. Abraham comes alone. Isaac is numb. What happens to him? He goes, and here's what I'm wondering. He goes to Be'er Lachai Roi. What does he do? He goes to the place of Hagar and Ishmael. Now, the traditional commentators like Rashi, who's the best of the best, he says that Isaac is coming from Be'er Lachai Roi because with Sarah having died, listen to this. So what happened was that Isaac went to bring Hagar, Abraham's first wife, back to Abraham. Actually Hagar was the second wife, of course. He goes to bring, now that Sarah is gone, who bring Hagar back to Abraham. But I'm just wondering the following. Could it be that right after the Akedah, Isaac felt for the first time he felt the suffering that Ishmael endured when he was driven out by Abraham. And Isaac maybe believed that he was the cause of Ishmael's expulsion. You remember the story? When Sarah sees after Isaac was born that Ishmael was Mitzachek, Ishmael was Isaacing. And he became concerned that maybe Isaac would replace Ishmael, as indeed occurred. So why was Ishmael thrown out? He was thrown out, Isaac felt, because of himself. And so maybe for the first time he understood Isaac as one who was expelled in going to the Akedah, using a very strong verb, maybe he was feeling what Ishmael felt. And therefore, he goes to Be'er Lachai Roi to apologize. I want to repeat that. He's coming back. He feels forlorn. Isaac feels cast out. He's a fragment of what he's been. Maybe he feels expelled. And so what does he do? He understands within his heart, boy, now I know how Ishmael felt, and I am the one who maybe caused that expulsion of Ishmael. For the first time, he feels his pain, and he goes to Be'er Lachai Roi to say two words. I'm sorry. Slach li. Please, please forgive me. I want to take it a step deeper. Is it possible too that feeling abandoned, Isaac believed that the person who could best understand the pain of being cast out was none other than Ishmael, who had been expelled by Abraham. It's a deeper step. It's another step. That the first idea was that Isaac is returning to Be'er Lachai Roi to Ishmael because he wants to apologize. The second is, with whom could he commiserate? With whom could share his feelings of having been thrown out? He could share it with Ishmael because he himself had been thrown out. And just as God listened to Hagar's cries, Ishmael, as his name reflects, what does Ishmael mean? If God hears, he may have developed a heightened quality of being able to listen, listening to Isaac's pain and helping him return home. So that the next time we hear about Isaac, he's returning from Be'er Lachai Roi, which implies that that's why he went there right after the binding of Isaac, Why did he go there? Either because he felt and understood that he had to say, I'm sorry to Ishmael, or he felt Ishmael could understand his plight. And interestingly enough, if we look at this week's portion in chapter 25, and with this I'll stop and I want to open it up because Ezra's not teaching today, but there's a remarkable chapter 25, if we can turn to it, Shuli. Chapter 25, this is now after the death and burial of Sarah, after Isaac has met Rebekah. So the text says, Vayosef Avram vayikach isha ushma Keturah. Abram took another wife whose name was Keturah, and many people say that Keturah was Hagar. Keturah from the word Ketoret, which means like a frankincense, someone who was as sweet as spices. He remarries Hagar. And now if we can look further down in sentence 7, and Abraham lived 175 years and he died. And look at sentence 9. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. Now they're in Hebron. In other words, at this point, with the death of Abraham, Ishmael, who was in Be'er Lachai Roi, he comes back to Hebron where Abraham was, and he joins Isaac in burying their father. And here is something so radical, but it's in the text. Sentence 11. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lachai Roi. Wow. I could face everyone. I mean, this is what the Torah is saying, that he settled in Be'er Lachai Roi. He went back to Ishmael land, and there they were. Now, the story is going to pick up in the next portion that Isaac marries Rebekah, and by that time he's probably returned to Hebron. But it's quite something that he goes back to Be'er Lachai Roi. So which is it? How does Isaac return from the Akedah? Does he return literally as one with Abraham? No need to even say that he returned with Abraham. It's built in, it's obvious. Or it's that Abraham returned having fulfilled God's words, but the boy struck dumb, as Daniela poetically, artistically writes, numbed forever after by the terror of what had been done to him. Which is it? I'm going to stop here. Let's get your feelings on this. And again, thank you, Daniela. Yes, Tova.
You know, I'm
We can
sorry.
turn on the mic.
Is that? Oh,
I hear her. I hear Tova.
uh,
I hear you, Tova.
yeah, I'm sorry, Rav Avi, but I can't agree with a lot of what you said. There was a time that I did, but now I just see it. I see it differently. First of all, I think we have to. It was not God who told Abraham, "Don't touch the boy." It was the Malach Hashem. That's one. Another thing that I realized, we say that Lot was so bad because he was ready to sacrifice his daughters. What was the difference between Lot and Abraham? Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son.
Yes.
And that Yitzchak went back to the place where his brother was saved. Where else would he go? He had to go to a place that represent saving. Maybe the shrink was there too, I don't know.
Right.
But I just think that there are too many questions in this story. I don't see it as something, so beautiful as I once did, or as you're describing.
Mhm. Right.
Well,
Anybody, thank you, because I don't think there are simple answers here. There are no simple answers.
Yeah.
It's an open story, and
Mhm.
we're trying to find meaning in the story. But
Mhm.
if there's anyone else who wants to,
Can I
Yes,
ask a question, Bobby?
yes,
Yes,
Judy.
the question is, you were talking about Yitzhak going to their Ahavah to apologize to Yishmael. But my question is, why wasn't Abraham the one who threw Hagar out? Shouldn't Abraham have been reaching
absolutely.
out to Hagar? Well, in the end, like you said, he did marry Hagar. But as far as the going back to Bear Ahavah for the first time, I don't understand your point in saying that Yitzhak was reaching out to Yishmael. I understand the connectedness, but I think that the one whose obligation was, and maybe like you said, he married Hagar, and that was the teshuvah for throwing her out.
Yeah, but why did Abraham expel? Why did he expel Ishmael? Why did Abraham? Why?
God told him to listen to Sarah.
Okay,
Right.
but who?
Don't blame it on Sarah.
No, but in expelling, when God says expel Ishmael, for
Mhm.
whose benefit?
Isaac's.
Isaac's benefit, yes. And so
Right.
Isaac may have felt somewhat responsible for the expulsion of Ishmael. And he therefore is going to Beer Lachai Roi to say, I'm sorry. I apologize. Or as we said, he's going to Beer Lachai Roi because he feels that Ishmael knows what expulsion is all about. He would be able to understand me. And from that perspective, maybe Ishmael helped Isaac return to his family.
Rabbi?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
Using today's thinking, I find it very hard to understand that how Isaac could forgive his father. I mean, this would be very, very difficult for me to comprehend. So if his father, if Abraham represented God, it almost seems to me logical that Isaac should also feel deep this like and distrust of God. It's an extent. Isaac and Abraham is an extension of God. So if you're disliking or hating or fearing your father, why didn't Isaac extend that to God himself?
Right. I don't know the answer to that, Ruby. It's a good question. What I have found, and I think we've all found, is it's hard to predict how one feels in circumstances about whatever one is feeling. Even everything that's logical, Ruby, would point to what you're saying, and that is, if you're upset with Abraham, you're upset with God. But sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes people's beliefs are inexplicable, and people could believe despite all that's unfolded. It's hard to know.
Rabbi?
I don't know if that's satisfying, but and I think it's a great question. As usual, Ruby, your question is much better than my answer.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I see, can I see some hands so I can tell the rabbi who's coming? I see Lance's hand. I think it's Rita's hand. Is that right? Is that you, Rita? And I see Arnie's hand and Ted's hand.
Okay.
So Lance, Rita, Arnie, Ted. Lance, I don't hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Calling on David Weiss Halivni, who talks about the corruption of texts, Jewish
Yes.
texts, I would suggest that this doesn't add up at all. That you have Abraham as someone who welcomes strangers, including strangers in Sodom and Gomorrah, and kills or excludes his own family, Hagar and Isaac. And what I like to suggest is we're dealing with multiple texts that have been stitched together, just as the Talmud is stitched together. And what we're doing, in effect, now, Rabbi Weiss, I think you're absolutely magnificent in what you said, but I just think that you're making the assumption that this is one text, and I just don't think it's one text. I think that, for example, Moses, okay, hears from God, God says, kill the mishpacha, and Moses goes right out and kills the mishpacha. I mean, it makes no sense. There are just all kinds of things all throughout the Tanakh and the Proverbs and Psalms and Philip Roth and Isaac Bashevis Singer. I mean, all these people are just, they don't make sense if you make the assumption that it's all one. Okay, a web page, for example, looks like it's flat, but it isn't. It has layers, it has web pages within web pages, and it's simply, that's what we're doing here. We're looking at a text that is a text of text.
This is, of course, as you know, Lance, a broader question that does come up. And that is there one editor, uppercase E, of the Torah? Did God write the Torah? Or is it a combination of different texts, as many of the biblical critics argue? And very often when there are contradictions in the Torah, I think the biblical critics would say it's not at all problematic because this piece was written by this author representing God in this way, and this one was written by J or by E or by P or what have you. I don't mean to be dogmatic, but I think I will say, and let me say this, that for me, it's that piece that I quoted my son. I look for meaning in the text, and Lance, I wonder if you would, react to this. A lot of the great meaning in text comes from the contradictions, from resolving contradictions. And life is complex. Life, we are people of contradictions. There's no one who lives life on one straight line. So my point is that, I'll give you an example. Moshe was a stutterer. We have in our Bayit Phil Schneider, who's the genius in helping people with, he's trying to help me now with my voice. I'm having a lot of problems with phlegm in my throat. It says Moshe couldn't talk. He says to God, I can't go to Pharaoh. You go to the book of Deuteronomy, he can't stop talking. Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe. So what do the biblical critics do with that? No problem. The book of Exodus that talks about Moshe not being able to speak. Okay, that's one editor, whatever the title, EP, and you all know that. And then Deuteronomy is someone else. And I hear that, and I want to try to understand that position and take that position in. But the way I look at it is, no, if I'm looking at it as one author, wow, what a message about life. That one could be in a state where one is unable to speak, but we all have it within our power with God's help, as you've heard me say so many times, to turn fate into destiny. That was the greatness of Moses. He couldn't speak, but he learned how to speak. This past Sunday, we were at a wedding at the Bayit, and it was a beautiful wedding of a Chovevei student, Devir Kahana. His father, a great rabbi from Montreal, is trapped in his body, couldn't speak. As a young man in his early 50s, I believe, he was stricken and so limited. And he was able to come to the wedding. And it was one of the most beautiful moments of, I don't know if you know him, Lance, he's up in Montreal. This man who couldn't speak, Lance, he said the bracha. And they taped him speaking. And while it's true, they had his words, whatever they call it, running on the bottom of the screen. You could hear his words. You could hear him speaking. I mean, one of the reasons that I believe in one author is, I think without that, we're missing a fundamental message of the Torah, that life is a life of contradictions, and that's what I think is happening here. I think Danielle, and if Danielle is on, I'd love for Danielle to say something. When I went to the yeshiva, this was Torah that was just off the tables. Lance, you couldn't say this Torah. What do you mean Isaac didn't come back? He didn't come back because he ran to a yeshiva. He was one with Abraham. But this impacts people. That's what Elie Wiesel was saying. If Isaac is the first survivor, survivors went through something beyond being traumatic. It affects people.
May I respond?
And then they had to try to make peace. And guess what? Isaac does make peace. He goes to the Be'er Lachai, but when it comes to his turn, he goes to the center of what Judaism was then, back to Hebron in the beginning of the portion of Toldot, next week's portion. He marries Rebecca and has children, and Jacob and Esau, and the story continues. He was hit hard by this, but he recouped. However he did. Maybe he made peace with Abraham. I'd like to think that he did.
Okay, may I respond?
Of course.
Okay. Number one, God enables Bezalel and Joseph. He is an enabler. He enables Moses. He enables the Pharaoh. God is the author of all. In a certain sense, what we're looking at, I don't agree with documentary hypothesis at all. I see God, okay? And most important, Will, from what you said, there was a hidden miracle enabled by God when this rabbi spoke. That is what Nachmanides calls a hidden miracle. And we see miracles all around us, okay? And I see miracles in galaxies that are dominated by recursion, in coastlines, in heartbeats, in trees, because trees, if you know anything about the tree, the branches have the same pattern as they keep growing. And on all these patterns, I see God. I see a manifestation of God in objects, in anomalies, in accidents, in coincidences, in all these things. I see God right now enabling both of us, Rav Avi, both of us. And I don't think that what you said is in any way wrong. I think it's brilliant. I think it's insightful. And I think what Tova said is brilliant and insightful. And I think what all of us are saying is brilliant and insightful. And you're right. It's so complex that there's no absolute answer to this. We just keep going.
Yeah.
But I go with Kohelet. And Kohelet is human life is a state in which much is to be endured and little to be enjoyed. But what counts, according to Rabbi Sachs, is the collective simcha. In other words, what we do is we get together and we rejoice. And that's the key. Because if you look around the world right now, in Ukraine and in University of Virginia, and all these places, all you see is evil. All around us, evil. What are we going to do? Can we change the world? I don't think so. What we can do is rejoice in our families, at the bayit, with the kiddush and so forth, and getting familial, all these things. That's what we can do.
Right. I just, we can go on and on. I really want Daniela to, if Daniela is on, Dani, if you're open, say a few words, Dani. What made you take the...
Rav Avi, I just want to
address in chapter 25, verse 9 that you just brought up.
Yes.
Vayikberu oto Yitzhak v'Yishmael banav.
Right.
You have the wonder of a different type of togetherness, a different type of reflection of the Yachdav that occurred before between father and son, between Abraham and Yitzhak, which was not a true togetherness because Yitzhak was the child who had no idea what was about to befall him. In this chapter, chapter 25, where Abraham has just died, you have a remarkable togetherness of two brothers who were basically poles apart, who had come together because, as you said, and I really love that approach, Yitzhak had gone to Ishmael because, as you said, Ishmael was the listener, and that is in his name, Shama. He knew how to listen. And you, Rav Avi, have said so beautifully, the letters wait stand for why am I talking? I should be listening. And we tend to do too much talking and not enough listening. And Ishmael listened to Yitzhak. And therein is the togetherness of listening. And as far as what you were saying about the complexity of our life, of our trek here, the complexity is always present in Judaism, which is what makes it so utterly remarkable. We marry, and there is pain in the joy, which is why we call up the memory of the Bet HaMikdash and we smash the glass. So sorrow and pain are interwoven. They're linked. They have to be linked. Otherwise, we are lying. There isn't only joy. There's also pain. And I think it was Vance. Am I saying your name right? Was it Vance just now who spoke?
Yes, yes, it was. It is Lance.
You spoke, it's Vance with a V, right? Or with an L? Is it L? Lance?
L as in love.
L. L as in love. I love that. Lance, you spoke so beautifully about the concept of collective joy. But in the collective joy, I really and truly believe there needs to be personal joy each and every day. A gratitude that we are able to wake up and in our own way bless our universe and the fact that we're still here to bless it.
Thank you, Dani. We've been on for a while now, and it's wonderful to be, Dani, thank you so much for inspiring this humble give and take, and thank everybody for your input. And I know when we turn on the TV, it looks like things have gone so awry, but I'm still a deep believer in the goodness of people. As Anne Frank wrote, even as she was taken out of her place when the Frank family was caught, sometimes I wish there would be a TV newsreel of only good things. And I actually think the bad things is the man bite dog story, and that's what we listen to. But there's so much good going on in the world. And what strikes me too is that Isaac, in our story, he went through a lot. He goes to the Be'er Lachairoi, which is very significant. It says something that while Isaac was the covenantal heir, not Ishmael, the fact that he was so close to Ishmael means we have to treat the children of Ishmael properly. without compromising on our being in the particular covenant that we are. There's a lot to unpack. So on that note, I want to wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful day. Ruth, feel better. And thank you for spending so much time with Toby on the phone. Elaine, feel better. I know that you're just going through all this. And Lance, thank you. And Robert, thank you. And Arnie, be well. And Carol, I expect to see you walking in Florida soon. Right? And Ruby, tell them to turn on the steam. You look like you're really. Okay. Hard for me to say goodbye, but be well, everyone. And next week, Ezra's on, so our session will be a bit shorter. God bless
Thank
you
you.
all. Ted and Bev, God
Thank
bless.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.